Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
I mean, how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.
Welcome back. It's another episode of the Karma Koala podcast, and I'm down in Australia for the second time this week. We've got a federal election coming up, as any of you listeners will know. So I'm trying to speak to as many candidates for the Cannabis Party as I possibly can around the country, and just to get a sense of what their thoughts are on standing, what their personal views are compared to party views, how much they're being asked to toe the line, if they're, and see if it's early days for them being politicians, so they might give something away. We'll see. But Miles, thank you very much for being on the show. Let's start with your background. Karma Koala is sort of mainly I talk to lawyers and policymakers and those sorts of people in the States. You were a lawyer. Are you still a lawyer?
Yep, still a lawyer, still practicing.
And have you got your own practice, or are you working for somebody else?
I work at a union, actually, the Actors Union currently. And so dealing with, Netflix and all the screen producers and trying to get a fair deal for performers. Before that, I was 10 years as like a personal injury workers' comp lawyer in a private practice.
Well, if cannabis comes in, employment laws is an ongoing, never-ending conversation. So you'll be you'll be fine with that. So, I mean, what led you from, being a lawyer to thinking, it's an obvious path, but only 1 in 10,000 think about it. Think that, cannabis, got to do something about this in Australia, or not enough's been done. I'm going to stand for the Cannabis Party. What sort of led you down that road?
Well, I think being a lawyer is an advocate for people individually. So being an advocate for a group of people, in this case, cannabis users, is not completely removed from that idea. I sort of always was interested in drug law reform, drug use. I've had my own drug use over the years, and I've seen the benefits that I've experienced from that. And that led me into, and cross that with law and seeing people charged and criminalized for personal possession. I thought, well, this is an unjust, unfair law, just ethically. So, like I believe in, I studied philosophy and all that sort of stuff, and it just seemed a law that's unfair and unjust. So 10 years ago, I got into drug law reform, ran for the Drug Law Reform Party, came out in the paper trying to talk about my own drug use, trying to get the conversation developed, set up a charity called Unharm, which did with drug harm reduction stuff. So I did that for a while, then sort of got out of it because I had a young family, and just got back into it recently. Last year, went to the Mardi Gras Festival in Nimbin, spoke again, and my kids just went to school, and I thought time is right to get back into my true sort of passion, which is
exactly right. And
drug law.
Well, but it's true. I mean, no, I've got a 22-year-old. It's always been my passion, and I've been in the world's most boring industry of legal publishing, talking about the dullest things for the last 20, 30 years. But of course, if your kids are going to be growing up in anywhere in the world, but Australia is a good example, they're going to access drugs. And I noticed it when he was about 15. And they were first experimenting with weed and stuff, and just endless stories of police lurking everywhere and all this sort of stuff. You just thought, I really do not want my children criminalized for something that, for me, although I've operated in a criminal environment, is it's like drinking a cup of tea, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a greater risk caused by the criminalization of drugs, in particular cannabis, which is a sort of low risk drug, and not talking at all about the ethics of criminalizing a plant and criminalizing 10 to 15% of the population who use it regularly, and the fact that the government's making that decision for you. This is just on a risk basis. The criminal process, police, courts, that sort of has a really negative effect on people's experiences, their lives potentially, their desire to be part of the community. Compare and contrast that to a system where you sort of bring it under the fold, regulate it, give people knowledge and access to knowledge and education about risks when they take substances, and try and encourage sort of positive or positive ethical the use of the drug as opposed to negative and pushing it into the black market underground. I think that's the way you deal with it. So I think it's ethical,
well,
but
I mean,
also
otherwise the black market,
rational.
it's just rational thought, isn't it? Black market just grows, and then that leads it into its own ever developing cycle that we're fully aware of. Let's go back to Unarm. That organization obviously continued after you founded it. I mean, were you looking when you started that? Was that was across the boards drug health issue? Was that sort of post sort of AIDS and talking about at that time the huge heroin use because you're from Sydney, aren't you? So the huge heroin use in Sydney.
No, it's sort of it was founded by a friend of mine, Will Tregonning. We did it together after the 2013 election when I got into the politics and ran for the Drug Law Reform Party. So he continued it and is the driving force. But we sort of followed in the footsteps of what you said, the heroin epidemic and the drug harm reduction sort of people like Alex Wodak, and there was people in who are intricately involved in setting up the syringe program and the injecting centre and all that sort of stuff in New South Wales. That they did a huge amount of drug harm reduction sort of stuff, and then we came in and there was this bit of a lull in it, and we wanted to revitalise it a bit and talk about it in modern terms around pill testing, drug checking, that sort of thing.
Well, that's right, because I mean, anybody who's from Sydney knows that it's one of the greatest MDMA cities in the world, along with cocaine. But of course, from the mid to late 90s onwards, the quality of supply got worse and worse, and there started being more and more problems, health issues with these drugs, and nobody seemed to be having that discussion, were they? As I say, every weekend in Sydney, I mean, it's a pretty healthy city for recreational drug consumption, isn't it?
Yeah, and there was a lot of people taking pills and that sort of thing, and the risk was significant, and people were dying. I remember when this is about 10 years, we started. People were dying at festivals regularly from too much overdoses of MDMA or on hot days. Not often doing silly things like having 2 caps before they go into a festival to avoid the sniffer dogs and other ridiculous.
Well, I was going to come to this discussion because it's a perfect example of this again, where the New South Wales government eventually allowed pill testing at that Yours and Ours festival, and the first thing that the police did said we're on site with sniffer dogs. They're just negating what was essentially took 5 years worth of conversation just to get one small tent and people doing a common sense thing, and then they come and just smash it on the head with the biggest mallet they possibly can. I find the approach of New South Wales police, I mean, they could have waited maybe 3 or 4 festivals down the line and then quietly started introducing sniffer dogs again, but they had to sort of shout and make a message from the start that seems to imply they're just not interested in any change at all.
Yeah, and it's absurd. Like you've got you've got the concept almost that they're prepared to sacrifice the odd young person's life to continue deterrence as a strategy. Like we can't have pill testing because it paints the wrong message and says drugs are okay, but we're prepared to let people die because of that increases the risk. I mean, pill testing allows people to go and test a drug and see if it's got something dangerous in that they don't want, potentially throw it in the bin, potentially save a life. I mean, it's just so obvious. I can't understand.
And the police are not unaware that Sydney is pill city. They know that whatever they do, people are still going to turn up to an event either pre-pilled or they're going to pill there. I mean, I just find it a beyond bizarre approach, and I won't even go into the early 90s where a lot of the supply was coming from at the time, because that might legally get me into trouble. Let's return to cannabis and not, sorry, I didn't mean to distract you, but that particular issue has really pissed me off this past week. So
Yeah.
I just,
Well, yeah, and the 100 years of criminalization hasn't reduced usage at all, right? So at some point you're going to have to accept that.
So,
But
I mean,
it doesn't.
your thinking at this stage is uh, the Cannabis Party has developed from the Hemp Party into a sort of some sort of political force countrywide, and you see hanging your hat there at the moment probably the best way to effect change.
Yeah, I mean, I was I ran against Michael Balderstone in 2013, and I really like him as a person. I think he's a great advocate for cannabis reform, and I've seen what the Hemp Party have done. But the legalized cannabis version of the Hemp Party, I think it's it's become a bigger political force. Obviously, it's it's bringing in more people, not just your regular cannabis users from say Nimbin and that had attracted it in the past. No, I think the issue is obviously getting broader uh, acceptance because of medical cannabis and the fact that it's being legalized in America and other countries across the world. So people are seeing more people who are having experiencing cannabis or their parents are using it for medicinal reasons. So it's becoming more acceptable socially. And there's so the party is sort of riding that crest of a wave. But I think it's also speaking in a common rational way. It's a small party. It's a party of the people. It's sort of also working in the environment that people are a bit sick of the major parties at the moment. It's got a single issue that people can get behind. There's a lot of related issues around hemp as as a product, and medicinal cannabis and cannabis recreationally. The justice issue of crime. There's a lot of related stuff there, but I just thought this is a good party. They're good people. I respect what they do and say. I respect that a lot of cannabis users have suffered stigma and a taboo for many years. I've been fortunate enough not to have had that myself to a great extent. So I wanted to put myself out there and support that cause. And I think now's a good chance to be part of a movement that's growing and could affect change. And there could be maybe this is one little win for the little guy out there, that we could legalize cannabis and allow people to grow their own cannabis and possess small quantities, to start with, without being criminalized. It's in a world where the environment's suffering, people are suffering. That's a potential win for people, I think. So it's a good cause, and I'm really glad that they accepted me into the fold and wanted me to run and chose me.
And since you've sort of gone public that you're standing, what's the reaction generally, amongst your political circles, so to speak, because you have been involved in these discussions before? Are you finding support for what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. Like a lot of people I grew up with are pretty supportive of cannabis legalization as a concept. So that's not too hard. I did come out publicly about drug use as a lawyer in 2013, which was quite a challenge.
Well, that was then my next thing is, being a lawyer. I mean, like, I suppose I don't know whether you're lucky in a way working for a union, but I presume the backlash. I mean, you couldn't be working for Clayton Utz and say that, could you?
No, exactly. And I was working for my mate's law firm, so he got a bit of pressure, but at the time, but we didn't. There was no significant backlash. I don't think we lost any clients, maybe one. Mentioned it. Just maybe no one was reading the SMH, but it sort of, I felt like it was a bit of 15 minutes fame with the barristers. They all called me the drug taking lawyer, and then it was sort of forgotten, and I continued my job. And I think I've had a good education and those things, which probably helped. And I was lucky that it didn't go bad, because if my mate had sort of sacked me, then you find yourself out of a job, and it could be a downward spiral. So I had a bit of fortune, bit of background and on my side, being middle class, educated, white, probably helped. Working for my mate, that all helped. So I sort of avoided any significant repercussions, and not everyone necessarily can do that, come out and their job. And then the union's been supportive of me running politically, because they're an employment agency. They believe in employment rights, and freedom of political communication, and they often have people who run for the Labor Party and things like that. So that's not been a huge issue. Obviously, the biggest stress for me was I moved to a new town up mid North Coast, young family at school, the parents that hadn't really known that long, a couple of years. Telling them has been the hardest thing because I don't want my
And
kids to
even in that
suffer.
part of the world
You
is
know,
the essential, even in that part of the world is the essential conservative nature of Australia still stronger than outsiders would like to believe.
I agree 100%. But the people I've opened up to about it, which has happened slowly, have been supportive and positive. And they said, "Well, we like you. We believe in you. You know, we're not going to end the friendship over that." And even if they don't necessarily agree, which I haven't had any huge disagreements or anything. Most people have been pretty supportive, and I think it comes to the fact that the majority of Australians now support
Well, I
cannabis
mean, yeah, most
legalization.
people, especially if you were born in the late 50s, 60s, I mean, there's obviously a percentage, but it's almost a non-issue, isn't it, for most people?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my mum, she was a bit stressed about it as well, about me opening myself up again. And again, I didn't want my kids to suffer for you're not allowed to hang out with them, blah, blah, blah. But so far, so good. And I think you're right. I think I created that in my head because, most people I've spoken, everyone I speak to is open to it. And most people see it. Most people have either smoked cannabis, know someone who smoked cannabis, know someone who uses it medicinally, or can see the injustice of our current system in criminalization. So I think, as you said, post 60s people certainly, we don't have that stigma attached as much as, in the past. And people certainly my age, people under 40, I'm just over 40, but people in that age bracket are pretty much all on board. I very rarely meet someone my age or younger who is against legalization or some regulation of cannabis. Certainly, everyone supports decriminalization that I've spoken to. Maybe some people out there, but it seems to be a pretty accepted thing.
So here's a slightly more tricky question. You've got to be a politician now, so I'll be not so much aggressive, but what are your views on the way that the current system for medical cannabis is structured in Australia, and does it need change?
I think so. I mean, I think it's too medical. It's medicalized, and you have a problem where you have medical companies who are running this operation. And I don't necessarily think that the information and the strengths of the product are adequately known by patients. I think I've tried medical cannabis and it's quite strong. So if you've got someone who goes and gets prescribed, who's never taken cannabis before, and they have a strong THC oil that they're prescribed, it could really cause them to have a negative experience or a stressful experience. So I think that's something that needs to change. The Yeah, I personally believe a better system is allowing people to grow their own and share their own and have
Well,
cannabis
I mean, look, this is my
clubs.
argument: is you can't create a medical system that generates cash for itself through prescribing cannabis for people with sore toes. And that cannabis, a lot of it has come from overseas. It's not tested. The people, and yeah, you and I know the conversation, but most people don't know the conversation about THC strengths and strains. A lot of this stuff is what I call adult use is produced for the recreational market in Canada, and then it ends up over here as over in Australia, I should say, as medical cannabis, and a new label is slapped on it, and I find that there's just a little bit. It's a little bit shifty when, of course, you could be growing at home, or what I think is really important is you actually have some regional producers. Australia is just absolutely fantastic in agriculture, and the fact that we've knocked the agricultural sector out of the conversation entirely and called it a semi-faux pharmaceutical sector, well, to be honest, pisses me off.
Yeah, well, I agree. And importing it, isn't it absurd importing it from Canada when it grows so well here? And you're right, we could have a sector here which is for cannabis growing. I think there's a huge potential for agriculture, for a hemp industry, and for hemp concretes and plastics and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, the medicalization, I'm not. I think there's problems with that model. I think you're right. There's cannabis is one of those products where there's a fine line between medicinal cannabis and recreational and spiritual. There's a lot of uses in creativity and spirituality and relaxation. So you got people who are probably being pushed onto medicalized cannabis because they want to have legal access to cannabis when they're really more of a recreational user. And as you said, there's not enough information and knowledge out there for people who are using medical cannabis around, the strains, indica, sativa, the THCs and the CBD oil and the ways these things should be used in a medical way. So I agree, and it's
And is the party talking about that as, even if it doesn't get people into the parliament, is it talking about itself as an education centre and trying to develop methodologies to get this information across to people? Because at the moment, because it's so new and fairly nascent, you get the sense that putting up good people like yourself to speak on the subject and you can have the conversation, but the message to me still seems a little bit disparate depending on where you are in the country.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I mean, the old days, the old rebellious, the hemp embassy in Nimbin's a good area of knowledge, but in the old days before medicinal cannabis was legalized in 2016, you had sort of very well knowledgeable growers who were making oils and going out there and selling it underground to people and providing that information and knowledge. These people had probably been growing cannabis for a long time.
No, I mean, look, they just arrested the main guy in New Zealand last week for doing that exactly, because I think the black market had grown so much, the police just came down on everybody. So, there's one guy that goes by the name Ganolf. It's just fantastic for New Zealand. They immediately arrested him and put him up in front of the magistrate. And it's just insane because the best educators within the system are criminalized, and then the only educators are are large companies who are there to please shareholders or their management.
That's it. Like the doctors prescribing or the company that's providing and then making the profit are not necessarily certainly not the right people. The best people, I would say.
And what they're paying those doctors, because I've now made it a point to follow every job ad for a prescribing doctor, and they're paying them, $500 an hour to prescribe. So just look at the economics of that, what they're actually making off those prescriptions.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. And I hope that one of our policies around setting up cannabis clubs for people to be able to share information. So you can grow your 5 plants, or you can get 100 people together to give their 5 plants each to a co-op, right? Basically, he grows 500 plants and then shares the cannabis amongst the 100 users, or the 100 members. And that way you get more knowledge. People, you've got the cannabis grower, you've got people coming in and sharing information. I think that is the model that sort of hopefully allows a proliferation of information and allows those sort of people who have a lot of experience in growing to come into the fold and be part of this, rather than the risk, as you say, is all this knowledge in the black market. Those people are sort of pushed away, and you just give it all to corporations. Well, that's a risk. I'm not supportive, and I don't. Legalized cannabis is very careful about trying to do this in a slow way and allow people to grow their own and sort of encourage a non-corporate model to start.
Agreed.
Maybe at some point in the future you could buy and sell at certain places, but I think, the non-corporate model is ideal. We know what corporations have done with other risky products, gambling and alcohol and cigarettes. It's not.
Well, and Australia is very particular as well, because of course, an elite of 4 to 10 individuals tend to love to control certain industries. I mean, it's the story of Australia, and it's always much better to import something on the cheap and flog it rather than actually invest in the country and do it properly. I mean, I won't mention Sydney Grammar School, but I will. It's because I do think that's part of the problem. Have you started doing town halls? What sort of reaction have you got from, in terms of your competitors for the Senate? Are they taking you seriously?
Well, yeah, I mean, we haven't really. The election hasn't been called, so we haven't had the actual campaign start. So I mean, there's a few things that have been put in the diary. We've got Senate debates, but legalized cannabis, traditionally hasn't been given a huge amount of attention by the media. it's not something the media usually, the mainstream media is, usually that supportive of. So we've had to do our own stuff, which is through.
Have you been approached by any mainstream yet? Because it's a sexy story now a bit, and they're completely clueless as to what questions to ask you.
Yeah, yeah.
Are they any interest so far?
We do. I did want, there's a little bit here, a few little articles here and there. We've been pushing it and doing a few media releases, and there hasn't been a significant uptake. So we'll wait and see and hope there's a bit more, some nibbles. But we're doing a few markets and getting out in the next few weeks for the state election up in the mid North Coast to, talk to people. This is a party that's really a party of the people. We get out there, we talk to people at these markets, and we and we get volunteers who go and chat and hand out flyers. And unfortunately, hopefully, I think we'll get a bit more mainstream media this time because I think we're a legitimate chance of getting a few seats in a few of the states. Yeah, hopefully we'll get some more reaction and positive news stories, but we'll see. We'll see when the election's called, which could happen any day. So
Yeah, well, we're waiting for that. Okay, I'm going to ask you about something entirely different because as you're a writer, you've got books, you've got to push them.
Mm.
What's your publishing history? Why did you start to write? It's always of interest to me. And what are you writing about?
Oh, thanks. I appreciate you mentioning that as a fellow writer. But yeah, I wrote a couple of stories, a couple of novels which were published by Australian Scholarly Publishing. I had a bit of a sort of Hitchhiker's Guide-esque comedy about a guy get killed by a tree, lands on his head, and that sort of goes back in time about all the random chance that exists in every life. And then my last one, The Information Editor, that was published a few years back. That's a dark dystopian about a world run by corporations,
Oh,
which
really?
a bit of the
Well,
surveillance capitalism.
well, if you watch the way that Musk was grinning from ear to ear as Trump did his thing in the Congress the other night,
Yeah.
our dark dystopian future isn't that far away, is it?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Already here. It's already here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hopefully, I don't know what to say. Hopefully some good comes of it all, and we end up in a better world. But who knows? It's a bit of a scary time, I think, for a lot and for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And everyone just hopes for the best and hopes that the power, we don't end up with huge wars and huge casualties and deaths and those problems. But
And what
I
led you?
guess
What led you to writing? I mean, did you study literature at university? Well, you
no, I
studied
just
law,
loved it.
obviously. So,
Yeah, 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 yeah. I just loved. I read On the Road when I was like at 20 at uni,
yes,
and that I
another
wanted to be
15-year
Kerouac.
old who was drawn in by. I was caught
Yeah.
at the petrol station on the way out of New York, and I never looked back.
100%. And I was like, for a while, I wanted to be like that. And I kept writing books, and it's been a massive struggle. 20 years of writing books. I enjoy the process, but it's been a massive struggle to ever get anywhere and get published. And, like I got published by a small publisher in Melbourne and had to have promoted all my books and done it all, sold to friends and family. And they're out there. And the last one, I've had some positive feedback, but the
Well, you're better
politics
than
seems
me
to
because
come easy.
I'm way too scared. A friend of mine in the UK, his partner, and she's one of these people. She works at Google. She was pregnant and managed to knock out a novel at the same time and promote it.
Oh, geez.
She's Italian, so it's written in Italian, but it's the same story. Small press, then had to do the rounds herself, heavily pregnant, pushing the book. But
Yeah.
it's I I haven't yet got there. I dream, I should stop dreaming because I'm way too old to dream. I should actually do it.
Yeah, just get out there and do it. I think the hardest thing about writing a book is finishing it. You just got to plow on. There's times when every book, there's multiple times when you want to stop and give